The two armies go to ground, and the Siege of Yorktown settles into a sometimes deadly but more often dull routine. Reinforcements would raise the number of men involved to 169,000, with the Federals enjoying a final superiority of almost exactly 2-1. On the Confederate side, Magruder's redoubts and trenches, including some first dug by Lord Cornwallis's British Redcoats in 1781, are extended and deepened and weak points strengthened, using slave labor impressed from the peninsula's plantations. Starting their fortifications and trench lines from scratch, the Federal troops have the much heavier labor, which is multiplied by McClellan's decision to emplace 111 of the largest siege pieces in the Union arsenal in order to blast his way through Yorktown's defenses. Day after day, at one point or another in the disputed ground in this hugely scarred landscape, there are exchanges between pickets or sharpshooters or artillerymen. At its best, life in the trenches mean endless boredom. Life in the trenches at its worst during the periods of miserable weather that mark these April weeks. Soldiers send their letters home datelined Camp Muddy and Camp Misery. A Georgian in Toombs' brigade, which had marched so gaily through Richmond a few days before, records in his diary one particular pitch-black night when his brigade has to crouch for 12 hours in a waterlogged trench knee-deep in mud and water while a cold rain pours down on them without let-up. In the middle of the night, there's an alarm and much firing. At daylight, they discover 2 of their men badly wounded and 1 dead. All 3, it is decided, shot accidentally by their comrades. It was a night that will long be remembered not only by me, but all that were in that disagreeable hole, he writes. Often as not, the killing is random and without purpose. Another diarist, Lieutenant Charles Hayden of the 2nd Michigan, is off duty one day and well behind the lines when he notices a soldier walking idly by himself across an empty field. With no warning, a shell bursts over the man's head, killing him instantly. It is the only Confederate shell fired within a mile of that spot during the entire day. Some men seem born to be shot, Hayden decides. By far the most dangerous siege duty is the advanced picket line, which calls for keeping a close watch on the enemy while at the same time avoiding becoming a sharpshooter's target. Captain William F. Bartlett of the 20th Massachusetts, in command of a company assigned to picket duty every 3rd day, expresses a universal complaint when he calls it very unpleasant duty. No glory in being shot by a picket behind a tree. It is regular Indian fighting. 4 days after writing this, Bartlett has his knee shattered by a sharpshooter's bullet and has to have the leg amputated. Early in the Siege of Yorktown, it is the Union sharpshooters who have the decided edge in this deadly contest, and any rebel showing himself is liable to catch a bullet. Among the units in the Army of the Potomac is a regiment of green-jacketed sharpshooters recruited by Colonel Hiram Berdan of New York that contains expert marksmen armed with special rifles, among them finely crafted target pieces equipped with telescopic sights. Designated as the 1st U.S. Sharpshooters Regiment and containing companies of men from all across the Union, the outfit is nicknamed Berdan's Sharpshooters after its beloved commander. One of Berdan's men tells his wife, "Our sharpshooters play the mischief with them when they come out in daylight." A rough balance is restored with the arrival at Yorktown of John Bell Hood's Texas Brigade from Johnston's army. Hood's men have a sizable number of British-made pattern Enfield rifles and know how to use them. When the Yankee sharpshooters grow too bold, the Texans will slip into the forward picket line for what they like to call a little squirrel shooting. Soon, their fire would drive the Federals out of the trees and other hiding places they favor and back into their fortifications, where sharpshooting continues, but on more even terms. The marksmen on both sides at Yorktown considerably exaggerate their prowess, especially to credulous newspaper correspondents. Yet there's no doubt that, because of them, the prudent learn to keep their heads down. The story quickly gets around, for example, of the Confederate soldier who woke up one morning in his cramped trench and unthinkingly stood up to stretch, was instantly shot through the heart. In spite of the sharpshooter's threat, the siege has its latter moments. One particularly novel form of entertainment in the Confederate ranks is electioneering. For months, Richmond has been struggling with what generally terms the fermentation of reorganization. keeping its army and being beyond the 1 year that the volunteers had signed up for in the first rush to the colors in 1861. To encourage reenlistments, it had tried bounties and furloughs, and even allowed men to change their branch of service, but with indifferent results. Finally, on April 16th, the Confederate Congress, acting on a bill drafted by Lee, takes the ultimate step and decrees conscription. Men between 18 and 35 would be subject to military service, and 1-year volunteers have their enlistments extended to 3 years or the duration of the war. Regiments have 40 days in which to reorganize under the new system and to hold new elections for their staff and company officers. For those who have seen enough of soldiering, even the thought of changing the rules this way is betrayal. Most of the men accept the new law more philosophically than others who complain of it, recognizing that there is nothing they can do about it anyway. At least electing their officers would break the monotony of their days. And they follow the campaigning with interest. Certain candidates find one-time tested electioneering tactic that works as well as in the army as it had back home. Resourceful Federals find ways to vary the monotony of their days as well. It does not take them long to discover the tidal creeks emptying into the York River below Yorktown contain the most succulent oysters they have ever tasted, and that the gray squirrels infesting the thick woods make a delicious stew. Wearing the enemy's colors, it is said, makes them fair game. The hogs that roam the woods are also declared contraband of war and subject to capture. Although the headquarters prohibition on firing guns behind the lines forces a resort to the bayonet, it is admitted that considerable effort is required for the enjoyment of roast pork. Informal truces, usually arranged when no officers are around, also serve to break the siege routine. These sometimes produce old coincidences. The men of the 2nd Rhode Island discover that the rebel pickets opposite them have haversacks and canteens stenciled 2nd RI that they had picked up when fighting the Rhode Islanders at Manassas 9 months earlier. The men of the 2nd Michigan find that the Georgians posted in their sector are from the same regiment they had faced the previous fall at Munson's Hill near Washington. They talk this over at a parley between the lines and agree that as old acquaintances they would refrain from firing at each other when on picket duty. In places where the lines are close together, there's a good deal of bantering back and forth. A man in the 61st Pennsylvania writes his family, as they have only a large swamp between them, they could talk as well as if in a room together. They throwing up Bull Run to our boys and we Fort Donelson and other places. At the James River end of the Warwick line, where tidal marshes 300 or 400 yards wide make the prospect of any attack highly unlikely, informal truces might stretch on as far as long as a stint of duty lasted. When one side or the other is due to be relieved, the pickets shout across to watch out and everybody keep their heads down, for they cannot be responsible for what the new men might do. Union Brigadier General Philip Kearny is struck by the ironies of the situation. It is not odd to think, he writes to his wife, that Magruder, one of my best friends, is one of the chief men here. This is surely a most unnatural war. At one of the nearby farms, Kearny goes on. He has a disconcerting experience of talking to an elderly slave of at least 90 who distinctly remembers as a child hearing cannon fire once before at Yorktown during the first siege of 1781. Union engineers examined old maps made by General Lord Cornwallis's British Army for clues to the Confederates' Yorktown defenses. Whenever the weather is good, Professor Lowe's war balloons, which by April 10th he has the Constitution as well as the Intrepid at the front, soar high in the air over Yorktown like great yellow soap bubbles, searching out information about the enemy positions. Generals frequently go up with the professor to cast a professional eye on what the rebels might be doing. Confederate artillerists do their best to shoot down the intruders, and while they score no hits, they do force Lowe to keep his distance and thus limit what he can see. This is arguably the first use of anti-aircraft guns in military history, as Major Edward Porter Alexander, Chief of Ordnance in General Johnston's staff, elevates his cannons to fire on the hot air balloons. For all the drama of these ascensions, Balloon reconnaissance brings very little real enlightenment to Major General McClellan. Certainly, they furnish him nothing that brings any reality to the way he was counting the Army of Northern Virginia. Indeed, the Intrepid very nearly derives him of his favorite general. On April 11th, in Professor Lowe's absence, Brigadier General Fitzjohn Porter goes up alone, and the balloon breaks free of its mooring and begins drifting straight towards the enemy lines. Fortunately for Porter, a last-minute wind shift carries him back to Union territory, and he manages to reach the gas valve and bring himself to the ground. General McClellan terms the episode a terrible scare, and Professor Lowe admits that it is some time before he can persuade any other generals to go up with them. Determined not to be outdone in aeronautics, the Confederates counter with a balloon of their own. Lowe was scornful. It was nothing but a hot air balloon. He called it a fire balloon and could only stay aloft a half hour or so before the air in the envelope cooled and lost its aerial buoyancy. Lacking a portable hydrogen generator of sort Lowe had developed, the rebels have to stoke a hot fire of pine knots soaked with turpentine to get their aeronaut, Captain John Bryan, off the ground. Captain Bryan has the same visibility problems as the Yankee aeronauts, complicated by the fact that his balloon has but a single mooring rope whose strands tend to unwind and spin him around dizzily like a top. On his third ascension, he duplicates General Porter's experience. His balloon breaks loose and drifts over the Federal lines, then is finally blown back to safety by a Confederate breeze. This was indeed luck of the greatest kind, Captain Bryan observed, and never went up again. Easily as unusual as the war balloons are the coffee mill guns, a Yankee invention getting a tryout in General Keyes' 4th Corps. This crank-operated prototype machine gun fires cartridges rapidly from a hopper mounted atop the barrel. President Lincoln, an enthusiast for new weapons, coins its name. Its promoters call it an army in 6 feet square. A newspaper correspondent is sure this example of Yankee ingenuity must have astonished the other side. No Confederates record any reaction to the novel weapon. However, in any event, as well sheltered as the rebels are from the Federal artillery, it is doubtful that the coffee mill guns claim any victims during the siege. On April 16th, Major General McClellan takes his first aggressive action against the enemy since arriving in front of Yorktown. He orders Brigadier General Beatie Smith to stop the rebels from strengthening their defenses behind the Warwick River at a place called Dam No. 1, the weak spot, as it happened, that Brigadier General Hancock had wanted to seize 10 days earlier. There is no truly pressing need for the operation. It is not the spot McClellan has selected to pulverize with his siege guns to force a breakthrough, and he hedges his orders with cautions. There is to be no general engagement. His last words to Smith are to confine the operation to forcing the enemy to discontinue work. Smith dutifully advances his divisional artillery close to the dam, along with the Vermont Brigade, 5 regiments from Smith's native state, including the 3rd Vermont that he had led at Bull Run back in 1861 for infantry support. For most of the day, the Yankee gunners and skirmishers blaze away at long range at the enemy across the mill pond. The Confederates prudently take shelter from this barrage, and nothing could be seen of them. An adventurous Yankee lieutenant wades across a waist-deep pond and comes back to report he thought the enemy's works could be taken. 4 companies from General Smith's old regiment, the 3rd Vermont, holding their rifles and cartridge boxes high, splash across the pond on a reconnaissance. As the rebel pickets scatter, the Vermonters rush into the rifle pits on the far bank and open a steady fire into the woods beyond. Having gained this much, no one in the Federal High Command seems to know what to do next. Beatie Smith is victimized by an unruly horse, which twice throws him off and leaves him stunned and incapable of seeing the advantage I have obtained. Major General McClellan, who had come to observe the operation, offers no advice and then leaves, having concluded that the object I proposed had been fully accomplished. After clinging to their foothold for 40 minutes, the 3rd Vermont troops are counterattacked by a brigade of Georgians and Louisianans and sent flying back across the pond, losing men at every step. Of the 192 who begin the ill-fated reconnaissance, 83 were killed, wounded, or captured. The Vermont Brigade's commander, Brigadier General William T.H. Brooks, belatedly sends in reinforcements, but their assault is shot to pieces before it fairly begins. Recalling McClellan's injunction not to bring on a general engagement, Brooks finally orders everyone back. The day's federal casualties in the skirmish comes to 165. The skirmish is dubbed by veterans of the clash as either the Battle of Dam No. 1 or the Battle of Lee's Mill. The operation leaves a sour taste. This battle took place at Dam No. 1 in Warwick Creek, a federal diarist writes, and was a damn failure. Two weeks into the siege, McClellan already has 100,000 troops under him. He has persuaded the president to let him have a 1st Corps division commanded by a favored lieutenant, Brigadier General William B. Franklin, and he had promised the 2nd McDowell's 3 divisions under Brigadier General George A. McCall as soon as the safety of the city will permit. Prospects for naval cooperation are improving. A new ironclad warship, the USS Galena, is slated for his use to break through between Yorktown and the Confederate batteries at Gloucester Point, and then cut the enemy's communications on the York River. Critics are muffled by the release to the press of official estimates of Confederate strength that ranges up to 100,000 men and 500 guns. A suddenly docile Secretary Stanton even volunteers to put Brigadier General Franklin in command of the 4th Corps, in place of the ineffectual Erasmus Keyes, an offer McClellan is quick to accept, although nothing finally comes of this idea. It at least suggests a thaw in his chilly relationship with a contentious Secretary of War. There's a strong gleam of optimism in the letter McClellan writes his wife on April 19th. "I know exactly what I am about," he tells her, "and am confident that with God's blessing, I shall utterly defeat them." He grows increasingly confident the next day as a result of new intelligence about the enemy's high command. He has heard, he tells President Lincoln, that Joe Johnston is now under the command of Robert E. Lee, and that greatly encourages him. "I prefer Lee to Johnston," he explains. To his mind, General Lee is too cautious and weak under grave responsibility, wanting immoral firmness when pressed by heavy responsibility, is likely to be timid and irresolute in action. The Yankees pursue their siege operations with great energy and according to the latest principles of military science. However, as much as he overestimates Confederate numbers, General McClellan never doubts his own superiority in artillery, especially heavy artillery. His confidence in ultimate victory rests on his guns. His siege train contains no fewer than 70 heavy rifled pieces, including 2 enormous 200-pounder Parrotts, each weighing more than 8 tons, and a dozen 100-pounders, all of which greatly outguns any cannon the rebels have at Yorktown. The balance of McClellan's heavy rifled pieces are 20-pounder and 30-pounder Parrott rifles and 4.5-inch Rodman siege rifles. For vertical fire, he has 41 mortars, ranging in bore size from 8 inches up to the massive 13-inch Siege Coast mortars that, when mounted on their iron beds, weigh almost 10 tons and fire shells weighing 220 pounds. Once they are all finally in place and open fire simultaneously, as McClellan intends, these siege guns would rain 7,000 pounds of metal on Yorktown's defenders at each blow. Such firepower dwarfs even that of the siege of Sevastopol during the Crimean War in 1854-55. 15 batteries for these heavy guns are dug and fortified. To reach the battery sites, new roads have to be cut through the forests and bridges built and old roads made passable by corduroying them with logs. The best at this road making proves to be the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry Regiment, whose skilled woodsmen and lumberjacks can clear a mile of road and corduroy a quarter of it in a day. The heavy pieces in the siege train have to be carried forward in canal boats on the York River and then up Wormley's Creek to the front. To mount one of the great Siege Coast mortars in battery, the side of the canal boat is cut down. Tracks are laid to the bank, and the piece is raised by a hoisting gin and dragged ashore on rollers and finally hauled to its platform suspended under a high-wheeled sling cart. Simply to stock the battery magazines requires 600 wagon loads of powder and shot and shell. Much of the digging for batteries and trenches and redoubts is done at night and under fire. The import of all this immense effort is not lost on Joe Johnston. As the siege drags on and the Yankees continue to fire only their field artillery in periodic exchanges, it becomes obvious that McClellan is holding back his big siege guns until all are in place and ready to open simultaneously. Major General D.H. Hill, now in command of the Confederate left at Yorktown and Gloucester Point, observes that with his control of the water, McClellan can multiply his artillery indefinitely, and as his is so superior to ours, the result of such a fight cannot be doubtful. One of his lieutenants, Gabriel J. Rains, predicts that when the enemies open fire, it will be with 300 shells a minute. One day Hill is discussing their prospects with Johnston. General Johnston asks him how long he can hold Yorktown once the Federal siege batteries open fire. "About 2 days," Hill says. "I had supposed about 2 hours," Johnston replies. Scouts and spies report evidence of the rapidly multiplying Federal batteries and sightings of numerous transports entering the York River, suggesting preparations for a drive up the river. It is also reported that the Yankees now have 1 or 2 more iron-cased war vessels in addition to the USS Monitor. To the trained military eye, a certain sign of impending attack is the appearance of parallels, the advanced trench lines from which the final assault would be launched once the siege guns have battered down Yorktown's defenses. On April 27th, General Johnston warns Richmond that the enemy's parallels are well along and he would be compelled to fall back to avoid being trapped in his own lines. On April 29th, he makes it official. The fight for Yorktown, as I said in Richmond, must be one of artillery, in which we cannot win. The result is certain, the time only doubtful. I shall therefore move as soon as can be done conveniently. Once Yorktown and the line of the Warwick are abandoned, Norfolk cannot be held for long. It too must prepare for evacuation. Johnston sends an appeal for the CSS Virginia to come to his aid by attacking the Federal shipping in New York and upsetting McClellan's best laid plans. This idea of a sortie by the Virginia has already caught General Lee's imagination, and he several times urges the Confederate Navy to send the big ironclad by night past Fort Monroe and the cordon of Federal warships to get in among McClellan's transports in the manner of a fox in a henhouse. For Robert E. Lee, a weapon in war is only as good as the use made of it. Flag Officer Tatnall complains that too much was expected of the Virginia. Her fight in March in Hampton Roads, in which her first captain, Franklin Buchanan, was wounded, has raised expectations too high. Tatnall says, "I shall never find in Hampton Roads the opportunity my gallant friend found." The truth of the matter is that the Virginia really is altogether a dubious proposition, unseaworthy except in a flat calm and ponderous to maneuver, inadequately armored, powered by engines that constantly break down. In truth, too, the adventurous spirit that had marked Josiah Tatnall in long ago battles against the Royal Navy and the Barbary pirates has cooled. Now, at age 65, his first impulse is to catalog all the possible risk in any plan, and certainly here is a plan freighted with risk. Tatnall is appalled at the thought of navigating the Virginia by night across Hampton Roads and up the York River. To attempt such a sortie by day would mean running the gauntlet of Fort Monroe's guns and those of the Monitor, the 47-gun frigate USS Minnesota, and assorted other Federal warships, not to mention the threat of being punched by the Yankee rams. Even if he somehow reaches the York River safely, McClellan's transports would probably find shelter from his guns in shoal water and in the tidal creeks. Flag Officer Tatnall can see only hazard in the operation. General Johnston would have to manage without any aid from the Virginia. Evacuating an army of 26 brigades of infantry and cavalry and 36 batteries of field artillery, 56,600 men all told within the siege works, and their equipment, and carrying out the evacuation secretly in the face of the enemy is a truly challenging task. It is also a complicated task. and Johnston has to endure delays caused by every imaginable complication. He finally sets the withdrawal for the night of May 3rd and makes it a without fail order. Anyone and anything not ready to move by that night would be left behind, and unlike the earlier Manassas evacuation, this time the entire Federal Army is only a few hundred yards distant. Perfect security proves impossible, and hints of the movement leak out. Northern newspaper correspondent Uriah H. Painter, for example, interviews an escaped slave from Yorktown who had seen the rebel wagon trains pulling out behind the lines. When Painter reports this to Chief of Staff Randolph Marcy, however, he is told it could be not so. Headquarters have positive intelligence the enemy is going to put up a desperate fight at Yorktown. This is indeed the message in most of the intelligence reaching Major General McClellan. On May 2nd, another contraband slave reports the Confederates are 75,000 strong and intending to hold out until 75,000 more men reaches them. On May 3rd, Detective Alan Pinkerton announces the enemy's strength to be between 100,000 and 120,000, and since that is merely a medium estimate, it is very likely under rather than over the mark of real strength of the rebel forces at Yorktown. McClellan is thus confirmed in another of his intuitive leaps of logic. Just as he had been sure in early April that Magruder would never attempt to hold a line all the way across the peninsula with a mere 15,000 men, he now concludes that with 8 times that number, the enemy would certainly stay and make a showdown fight of it. "I cannot realize an evacuation possible," he tells Beatie Smith. McClellan presses ahead with his plan for the grand assault. The heavy batteries would simultaneously open fire at dawn on Monday, May 5th, the 31st day of the siege. Once the enemy shore batteries are silenced, gunboats and the new ironclad Galena would run past to take Yorktown's defenses in reverse. Brigadier General Franklin's reinforcing division from Washington, held on shipboard for 10 days while McClellan debated what to do with it, is brought to shore to add weight to the attack. After a day or two of unremitting bombardment, or only a few hours, some predict, it is supposed that every gun and fortification between Yorktown and the headwaters of the Warwick would be demolished. Heintzelman's 3rd Corps would then storm the position. "I see the way clear to success, and hope to make it brilliant, although but with little loss of life," McClellan tells President Lincoln. After nightfall on May 3rd, a Saturday, the Confederates opened a tremendous bombardment with their heavy guns. The shells are not directed at any one point, but seem rather to be aimed at random, driving the Yankees to ground everywhere. The burning fuses trace brilliant red arcs across the sky. The surgeon of a New York regiment calls it a magnificent pyrotechnic display. At last, the guns fall silent, and for the first time in a month it is utterly still. At first light, Brigadier General Heintzelman goes up in the balloon Intrepid with Professor Lowe. "We could not see a gun on the rebel works or a man," the general would write in his diary. "Their tents were standing and all quiet as a grave." He shouts down that the rebel army is gone. The Yankees on picket duty rush forward and clamber into the empty redoubts, and the color bearer of the 20th Massachusetts lays claim to being the first to plant the stars and stripes over Yorktown. "The soldiers gave tremendous cheers," writes the 20th Lieutenant Henry Ropes. "It was altogether a glorious occasion." Another Massachusetts soldier, wandering through one of the abandoned rebel camps, is struck by the message scrawled in charcoal across one of the tent walls. "He that fights and runs away will live to fight another day, May 3rd. The Siege of Yorktown officially ends on May 4th, 1862. Major General McClellan sends a telegram to Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton declaring, "The success is brilliant, but the month-long effort to invest the famed Revolutionary War battlefield is lost on the men. The Confederates still have an army, and it is rapidly making its way towards Richmond. And so, the lead elements of the Army of the Potomac begin moving in hot pursuit to meet the Confederate rear guard under Major General Longstreet at the historic town of Williamsburg.